I mean, if we're talking geopolitically, then frankly, Israel is not fighting Hamas. They're fighting reality. You can't really win in that fight. I mean, I can recap basically what I've always said is inevitably going to happen in the Middle East with regards to the Israel-Palestine situation. I've been saying this for a long time. And the more time passes, the fewer people disagree with me. You know, I got a lot of hate at the beginning when I first said this. But that's the thing about being right. People like to take the right position once it becomes obvious that it is the right position. There's really only one way that this can go. There's only one way it can go, and that's de-Zionization of Israel and their integration into the region. Their decoupling from America and basically a transfer of their dependency to the Gulf. Israel will be absorbed into the corridor of influence along the Mediterranean that's controlled by the GCC and Turkey. The Palestinian territories will eventually be integrated into what is now Israel in line with a sort of the one-state solution, where the Palestinians are going to eventually be the majority with full citizenship rights, and the whole country is going to be part of that soft empire, that regional collective sovereignty being created by the Gulf states and by Turkey. So there will be an end of the conflict, there will be the elimination of all militancy, the establishment of stability through regional investment and development alongside the A National OCGFC and their investment in development and so on. That's the only way that this can go. And predictably, the elements in Israel who stand to lose the most from this, the Netanyahus, the Ben-Gvirs, and so on, you know, the ideological fanatics, the racists, the genocidal maniacs, they're flailing against this. But they're just no match. They're simply no match for the powers that are driving this transition. What we're witnessing right now in Israel is not Israel pursuing any sort of strategy. It's Israel literally running out of options. It isn't escalation as leverage, it's escalation as habit. You know, the violence in Gaza is no longer about deterrence or control or even security. They can't even make that claim. It's a ritual of dominance that no longer delivers results. It's a compulsion with no rational payoff. They're not advancing any cause by what they're doing. They're broadcasting their irrelevance, and the more irrelevant they become, the more desperate they become. This isn't speculation. The A National Financial Elite, the OCGFC, the A National OCGFC have already recalibrated. They have moved on to advocacy for stability and for infrastructure and integration and development. And Israel, with every missile strike, with every war crime, they're making it harder for them to justify Israel's inclusion in their future. The GCC sees this, BRICS sees this, even the West is beginning to understand that Israel has become a geopolitical liability. So why does Israel continue at all? Well, because the system that created Zionism never included an off switch. It was designed to expand until there was nothing left to take. And when expansion becomes impossible, they can't adapt. They just panic. So what you're seeing now is panic. It's panic, not power. It's not strategic maneuvering on the part of Israel. It's literally their disintegration under the pressure of historical redundancy. The idea that they could empty Gaza of Palestinians, that they could actually erase a people and still walk through the corridors of global legitimacy is absolutely delusional. The world's no longer willing to pretend. Egypt is not going to open the gates. Jordan is not going to comply. No one is going to legalize ethnic cleansing just to make room for Israel's fantasy of demographic supremacy. They don't have the capital, political or financial, to try to force anyone, not anymore. The economic elite who once backed Israel for regional leverage now see greater returns in de-risking the region, not destabilizing the region, de-risking the region. The GCC states are building a future for themselves and for the whole region, and they can't afford to mortgage all of that on a client that no longer follows instructions. I'm talking about Israel. BRICS isn't beholden to Tel Aviv. The OCGFC are restructuring the whole global system, and Israel is rapidly being priced out of relevance. The genocide is not helping them, it's isolating them. It's not strengthening their state, it's hollowing their state out, which just makes them more vulnerable and more susceptible for domination. And the longer this continues, the more irreversible the fallout becomes. They should be able to see it, but they're too ideologically blind. Because Zionism doesn't do moderation. It can't pivot to diplomacy or recalibrate its methods. It's a binary system. Conquer or collapse. And now that it can't actually conquer, it defaults to collapse. This isn't the end of Gaza. It's the end of Zionist strategy. It has become morally indefensible. It has become economically unviable. It has become diplomatically corrosive and strategically incoherent. It no longer makes any sense in the world. The world has stopped pretending that it does make any sense. This genocide is not going to save Israel. It's not going to protect their security or revive their legitimacy. Quite the opposite. This is only going to mark the final chapter in a doctrine that mistook brutality for authority. But power and authority is much more complex than that. And I don't think anyone in the region has actually understood this better than the GCC. I don't think you understand how much the GCC has been doing just over the last several weeks. Honestly, if you're not aware of this, then you won't have anywhere near an accurate understanding of what's actually happening in the world. But you know, a lot of people, especially even among Muslims, they have either an obsolete understanding of global politics, or they have an insurmountable bias against the Gulf, or else they just can't fathom Muslim countries actually operating with power and autonomy. Like they have such a colonized mind themselves that they imagine only the West can do anything. And our countries are only ever going to be Western lackeys. So they'll actually like literally block out reality just to preserve this programming. But look, the GCC countries have been on an absolute tear recently. Diplomatically, economically, strategically. It's really quite remarkable. And if you're missing out on it, you're really missing out on pivotal events. You know, just this month in Kuala Lumpur, for example. That meeting wasn't symbolic, it was foundational, as in they're building a foundation. Meanwhile, you've got people who don't even know that building is going on. But a whole architecture, political, economic, diplomatic infrastructure is being built right now across the global south, which is going to serve as the foundation for the whole second half of the 21st century. While Western powers are tangled in their own decline, you know, with conflicts and tariffs, debt ceilings, protests, inflation, what have you, the GCC is coordinating inter-regional integration on an unprecedented scale. Like I said, you had that the second annual ASEAN GCC summit in Kuala Lumpur. It was the first ever ASEAN China GCC trilateral summit. Closed door meetings, energy deals, currency frameworks, digital economic pipelines. This is the global south unifying into function. You know, you had Indonesia announcing their alignment with the Saudi peace plan, which is basically the official position of BRICS regarding Israel-Palestine, i.e. Normalization with Israel, Indonesia agreeing to normalization with Israel on the condition of Palestinian statehood. And the Saudis have been going across Europe, lining up support for this, lining up support for recognition of a Palestinian state. Spain just recognized Palestine and halted all arms to Israel, banned all ships carrying arms to Israel from docking in Spanish ports. And they made that announcement not just 2 weeks after signing massive investment deals with Saudi Arabia. You think that's a coincidence? No. That's what power looks like when it's played smart, when you use your power correctly. That's investment diplomacy. That's transactional sovereignty building. You know, the GCC recognized that in a Western-dominated world order, money is actually the only thing that counts. The rules of the game are actually incredibly simple when it's that game. And you can't win that game except according to the rules of that game. And the Gulf states have all the resources necessary to do that, and that's what they are doing. I mean, let's be clear, the EU has been deeply divided. 15 out of 27 members still don't recognize Palestine. But now, you've got 1.6 billion euros coming from the EU to the Palestinian Authority. France is ready to join the recognition wave by summer 2025. A joint UN conference that's going to be co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France in June. That doesn't happen because of inflammatory emotional rhetoric. That happens because of economic leverage being used wisely, strategically, and cunningly. And the leverage that they have is energy, capital, and access, controlled all by the Gulf. What the GCC is doing is incredibly strategic. They're playing the game extremely well. You know, they sign a deal, they frame the political demand, they co-host the diplomatic theater that everyone needs, and they redirect legal and humanitarian legitimacy back towards Palestine. You know, you might see the headline, France may recognize Palestine, but behind that, There's Saudi investment. There's UAE financing. There's Qatari mediation. This isn't appeasement. This is realignment. They are forcing a realignment on the West. They're not begging the West. They're buying it. That's what the West always did. They always used money to shape policy, but it was policy only for their interest. But now the GCC is doing it better. Palestinian statehood is being packaged inside of investment portfolios. And the West is accepting the terms because they have to. They have no alternative. So to all of the doubters who have always been asking, what's the GCC doing for Palestine? Wake up. This isn't Twitter activism. This is systems level influence. They're rewriting Europe's position one contract at a time. You can't force Europe to act morally. You can't shame them into morality. You can only make immorality too expensive, or anyway, make it less profitable than morality. And you can reward decency with deals. The GCC has figured this out. And now they're exporting justice, the only way that Europe understands, through economic pressure and through economic opportunity. You're watching, if you understand what you're watching the end of the G7 era in real time. Because while America is sanctioning, for example, the GCC is constructing, local currency cooperation, that's de-dollarization in real time. Regional business councils being set up, that's parallel economic governance mechanisms being set up in real time. Food and energy security, that's mutual dependence without imperial extraction. That's collective sovereignty. This isn't diplomacy, this is architecture that they're building. You understand? That's strategic, long game, systemic architecture that they're building. A multipolar financial system, local currencies, fintech, digital payment rails, no IMF, no dollar, no approval needed from Washington. That's what the future looks like. A development corridor from the Arabian Peninsula through Southeast Asia to China, Gulf capital, ASEAN markets, Chinese infrastructure. In other words, a new world system with the West on the outside. They're building a behemoth while you still think Israel has power. I'm sorry, but that's patently absurd. Israel is deteriorating before our eyes. They're building nothing. They're depleting any power that they ever had by the hour. The GCC discussed Gaza at that multilateral summit with ASEAN and China, and that wasn't just virtue signaling. That was a repositioning and a fortification and consolidation of the Palestinian issue into the mainstream of the Global South agenda, where Israel has no control over how that's framed or has no control over the outcome. That's strategic reframing. That's how sovereignty is protected in the 21st century. Not by slogans, but by systems. And that's what they're building. Systems. You want slogans. You want fiery rhetoric. But meanwhile, they're building infrastructure. They're building systems. They're building architecture. If you're still expecting the future to come from the West, you're facing in the wrong direction. Nothing is happening in the West. The future is being written from the South and from the East, and the Gulf, whether you like it or not, is one of the authors. The GCC isn't just oil anymore. It's not just finance. It's coordination, infrastructure, diplomacy, and control of narrative. If you're not paying attention, you're going to wake up one day realizing that you missed the whole transition. You missed the whole transition completely while you were denigrating and insulting and dismissing the very people who have been driving the transition. So you should take this seriously and you should pay attention. You should pay attention to what the Gulf is doing, but most of you probably don't even know. This is the global pivot. Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah, the Muslim world is right at the center of it.